Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. The 2022 midterms, they will be here before you know it. And already there are some fascinating races that are taking shape. And one of the most interesting, at least that I've seen so far, involves New York's Staten Island, part of New York City. It's the New York 11th congressional district. It is a district that is held by a freshman incumbent Republican. The challenger, though, is Brittany Ramos DeBarros. She's a Democrat, a community organizer, an Army combat veteran, and she joins us now. Brittany, welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, David. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. You're pretty young, 32 years old. Why now? Why this particular race?
Well, one is because we are the leaders we've been waiting for. I really believe that. I had no aspirations to run for office, but several members of my community came to me and asked me to run and said, we not only need to get our Trump endorsed Republican, representative out of office, we need to build a real movement here and momentum that is exciting the vast majority of voters and community members here who haven't been engaging with the process. We think because they haven't had candidates that they can really get excited about. So we're looking to change that.
I'm going to ask you about your platform in just a moment, but you mentioned Nicole Malliotakis, who is the Republican incumbent. Anything particular about her? I mean, is there any personal dislike for her? Is it just policy-wise, simply because of the Trump endorsement that she shouldn't be there?
I think even if I personally disliked her, that would be irrelevant. I think that for me, this is always about what's good for our communities. And I think what we have right now is someone who has received thousands and thousands in corporate contributions, very obviously meant to influence her votes on critical committees like the Foreign Relations Committee, the Transportation Committees, et cetera. As well as developers who have really been adamant in making decisions that are not what our community needs, while we see basic infrastructure continue to be neglected, communities, schools, facing real funding issues, our housing stock having real health issues that aren't being addressed, et cetera. I think we need someone who is really going to be loyal to the people and make decisions based on what the people need and not these corporate interests. And at the end of the day, that doesn't represent her. She's never held a real job outside of politics. She's had everything handed to her. And yet she shames the families in our communities who are struggling to get by amidst the layered crises that we face. And I think that that's unacceptable for a leader of any party.
Your policy platforms include expanding healthcare, expanding public education, improving public education, also more jobs and housing for all. But obviously Washington sometimes is about priorities. And let's just suppose you win, the Democratic leader in the House, suppose it's Nancy Pelosi, she pulls you aside and says, look, which of these is your priority? What's most important and how do we get there? What do we do? What would you say to her?
Yeah, my priority is investing in our communities in any and all of the ways. I think that has to happen through a robust community investment package, similarly to the package that we're seeing be debated right now in Congress, the Build Back Better plan. That's something that's a really good example of the kinds of investment that I would support, that I think we need to be boldly supporting and building upon. But ultimately, I also think that one of the priorities that we have to focus on is campaign finance reform. I think we have to get corporate influence and money out of politics if we're going to open the door for electing leaders that are actually going to be willing to pass the things that we know are already popular, like Medicare for all, like moving money out of the corporate coffers of defense contractors into the needs of actual veterans and community members of all varieties that need basic things like good housing and jobs and investments in our small businesses, et cetera. To me, it's all very connected.
A lot of this, though, a lot of these programs cost money. And one of the arguments that we've heard from centrist Democrats, whether it's Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema in the Senate, and those are Democrats, by the way, or that you might hear from Republicans where you are in Staten Island is, well, we don't have a lot of money, but we have this debt that we have to worry about, that we can't keep making the debt larger. What do you say to those Republicans, to your own constituents who have that concern?
Yeah, well, first I would say all of those people just voted to expand the military budget, and half of that military budget goes to corporations. So I just don't think that they're making that argument from a good faith place. I think for the folks that are concerned about that from a good faith perspective, I think we need to look at the fact that I just saw a report come out, I think it was in the Washington Post, that said we've had 8 storms that have cost $1 billion each hit the West Coast of the United States already. And the reality is that we can't afford to not make a change. We we are on a collision course that is costing lives, is wreaking havoc and destruction in our community infrastructure, will continue to have economic impacts and at levels that we can't even really fathom right now. And we're already seeing the evidence of that. That is no longer this kind of hypothesis that we should be debating. That is a fact. We are seeing that happen in the 8 billion that those storms have already cost us as an example. And so to me, the argument is that we can't afford to not make these real fundamental changes in where we're investing our money. And I think that if we're going to have a government that is collecting as many tax dollars as it is from us, that those tax dollars should go into things that actually benefit everyday working families and not to create subsidies for corporations like Amazon. We had subsidies of 8 million here in my own community, my own district, for a corporation that put up record profits amidst a global pandemic while families were struggling just to eat and keep their housing. So, I think that we really need to reframe the way that we talk about what we can afford and what we can't.
Well, a lot of Democrats are suggesting that perhaps when it comes to their own framing or reframing of the 2022 election, some Democrats, and we've seen this with Terry McAuliffe, who's running for governor of Virginia, sort of a purplish state, that Joe Biden is something of a drag right now. You're an Army veteran. You saw what happened in Afghanistan. There is this argument that the Afghanistan withdrawal was a bit messy, that maybe it showed a certain level of incompetence by the Biden administration. Do you agree with that?
I agree that the withdrawal was not handled in a way that truly centered care for the American citizens that were still there, for the Afghan people who saved lives of people like mine, and just for the Afghan people who we justified this war for 2 decades by saying that we were there to help them. And so I think we have to be willing to be honest about that, because if we're not, we can't actually make changes and do better in the future. So I'm grateful that the Biden administration did withdraw. I don't think it was a matter of time. But yes, I think we need to continue to learn from those lessons and do a better job. And I think we need to make things right and invest in real reconciliation and reparations for communities that have been harmed by these wars, including the nature of this withdrawal, including the family that was killed by yet another drone strike, killing civilians on our way out. If we're going to be able to actually engage in the kind of cooperation and collaboration internationally that our survival is going to depend on.
For Joe Biden and other Democrats, there does seem to be this endless debate about whether the wise politics for the Democratic Party is to move further towards progressive values, as you have in terms of expanding Medicare for all and education and opportunities, or whether Democrats should pivot back towards the center in the hopes of winning more purplish states or Republican districts like Staten Island. If Joe Biden was here and you had an opportunity to explain to him why you think progressivism is working, what would you say to him?
I mean, I don't know. I think that this question sidesteps what's actually happening politically. To me, when I talk about this, people talk about, the extremities of different positions, but our conditions right now are extreme. What is the center or moderate position when you're starving, when you're struggling to keep a roof over your head? That there's nothing center about starving. And that's what we're really talking about when we're talking about actual humans. It's not this kind of red versus blue, left versus right. This is actually about top versus bottom. This is about how do we lead in a way that actually prioritizes care for communities, which is what you're charged with when you're elected to represent communities. And so to me, this question of where should we fall on some spectrum of left versus right that folks have made up sidesteps the very human suffering that is happening in our communities. And to me, the bottom line is, how are we gonna address those suffering, the conditions that are causing people to suffer, and how are we gonna build in a way that invests in the transformation that's needed for our future?
When I hear you talk about suffering, I think, of course, about the pandemic and COVID-19, and even though this isn't really your sort of a purview as a potential member of Congress, but I'm sure every politician, regardless of their level, is going to be asked about this perhaps over the next couple of months. Once a vaccine is available, FDA approved for children, should it be mandated that kids be vaccinated with a COVID-19 vaccine in order to go to a public school?
I think it's really good that we're having public discourse about this. And right now, I'm taking a lot of time to listen to all of the different sides of teachers and parents and students and all of the different folks in our community right now who have a lot of different important and sometimes contradictory perspectives. So right now, generally, I think that the government should not be, especially at the federal level, asking these questions of what are we going to force people to do, but how do we really invest in making sure that folks are educated, that we're addressing the real crisis of faith that exists in our media and in our institution, because that's the root cause. People are susceptible to all of this misinformation and doubt because they have been lied to by media, by politicians, by so many of these people. And a lot of us, including Democrats, don't want to acknowledge that people have really valid concerns and fears that have for decades built up. And I also think that that speaks to this question of moderatism versus leftism or progressivism, is that at the end of the day, if we don't actually start addressing these human needs and moving in a way that is about meeting people's needs, then we're going to continue to see people leave both of the parties, and we're going to continue to lose. And so I think that mandate or not, we just have to be investing in healthcare, wraparound healthcare and wellness investments in our communities, and that's what I'm concerned with.
Brittany Ramos DeBarros, she is a Democratic candidate for the 11th congressional district in New York. And as you've just heard, there are a lot of Democrats who are very high on her for reasons that should be obvious. Brittany, thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, David.
And that'll do it for this edition of The Conversation. On behalf of Marissa Matthews, Brendan Limer, Asher Caulfield, and the rest of the team at the Young Turks, I'm David Schuster. Thanks for watching.